Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of CF's Breadboard builds. Today we're going to be looking at the MXR Distortion Plus, classic op-amp distortion from the late 70s. I think this was the first op-amp, not the first, but one of the first op-amp distortions available at the time. This and the Boss DS1 came out around the same time. So not sure of anything before it, but I think this is one of the first. Famously played by Randy Rhoads, Dave Murray of Iron Maiden used it. Jerry Garcia apparently used it for some drive sounds. I saw Mr. Big back in 2015, and after the show, after they were done playing, I ran up and checked out Paul Gilbert's board and was surprised to see a Distortion Plus on it at the time. And so yeah, pretty popular classic distortion circuit. In this video, I'm going to be going over the circuit theory and operation. And then I'm going to play some sounds, and then I'll go over some modifications that you can do to your pedal. And I'm not talking anything crazy where you gotta drill holes and to add pots or add circuitry. Just pull a component and put another one in, and some of the stuff will, changes the sound of the circuit. We'll start off by saying this is a pretty easy circuit. There's not a lot to it. Very few components, not much to it. Very good circuit for a beginner, do-it-yourself, or wanting to get in and learn this stuff. This is a good circuit to start with in the distortion overdrive type realm. Good one to start with. Let me begin with going over kind of the boring part. This circuit right here is the power supply, and it's a simple voltage divider circuit, and the point is to get a voltage that we can use for the midpoint bias of the op-amp. So basically we just take 9 volts. This is positive 9 volts coming into the top of this resistor here. This is a meg ohm resistor. This is a 1 meg ohm resistor. They're the same value. So that cuts that. This resistor drops 4.5 volts, and that resistor drops 4.5 volts. And therefore this midpoint now has 4.5 volts. So that's the point of that power supply. So kind of more on that later. The bread and butter of the circuit is, of course, the op-amp. This is an LM741. It's a single op-amp circuit. You only get one op-amp, as opposed to like a 4558 chip that has 2 op-amps in the same package. This is just a single one. Every op-amp has 2 inputs and 1 output in regards to the AC signal we're trying to amplify. It also needs power, so there's 2 other connections, positive, DC, and the ground. Positive is right here. This is coming off my power supply. Positive 9 volts into this pin right here. This pin right here is the negative, the going back to ground. So those 2 are what powers the IC itself. Back to the inputs. Let's start with where the circuit comes in, where the signal comes in, and that's this wire here. Comes in off the switch, which is coming in off the input. Comes into this capacitor. This capacitor is basically an isolation capacitor. Keeps the DC from going back into the guitar or previous pedal. And after that capacitor, go into this resistor, and that resistor goes into this input right here. That's the non-inverting input of that op-amp. You also see this resistor here. That's a 1 meg ohm resistor, and it ties back to this orange wire right here, which, as you'll see, comes over to the aforementioned 4.5 volts. So that's what provides the midpoint bias of this op amp. We want that signal, that the 0 point line of the 0 volt line of that AC to be biased on the DC line at 4.5 volts. So we get the entire positive and negative going transitions of that AC signal to go through that op amp. So that's the point of that. 4.5 comes into this 1 meg ohm resistor, provides that midpoint bias. I also should say that 1 meg ohm is a good value to in providing a higher input impedance for the guitar. Guitar is a low output impedance instrument, and in electronics you want impedance matching. So if you've got low output impedance, you want high input impedance, and that 1 meg ohm does just that. I'm going to skip over the other input for now. I'm going to go right to the output, and I'll get right back to that input. That's you come to this output, and this side here is the output where this capacitor is tied to, and this other resistor. And if you know, this resistor is tied back to that inverting input. And that's the key to how op amps work. That's called the feedback loop. And how an op amp works, how the gain functions is it's based on the value of this resistor. If that was a short across there, the gain of that op amp would be unity. And by gain, I don't mean drive and distortion. I mean amplitude coming out. Unity would be you put a volt in and you get a volt out. As that resistance increases, the gain of that amplifier increases. So increase the resistance a bit, you can put a volt in, you get 2 volts out. So on and so forth. Keep increasing that resistance, put a volt in, get 10 volts out. Excuse me. In this case, the MXR used that's a 1 meg ohm resistor. Pretty high resistor for in a feedback loop. Bring the gain up pretty high. Off of that non-inverting input too, we have this section right here that goes over this filter section. Got a capacitor and a resistor. Once again, this capacitor acts as blocks the DC. And then you've got the resistor, and then we go over to our potentiometer. This potentiometer is the gain knob of the pedal. And this one functions kind of differently. A lot of pedals you'll see, as I was saying before, if you vary this resistor, the more the resistance increase, your gain will increase. A lot of pedals you see, Proco Rat, Tube Screamer, Blues Breaker, the potentiometer is this resistor. That's how you increase the gain of the pedal. For whatever reason, MXR decided to use this feedback loop actually needs a pathway back to ground. So what MXR did was they used a resistance to choke off the pathway back to ground. So when that's up to its full 1 meg ohm, it's minimum gain. You're not getting much through the pedal. And then as it goes down to 0 resistance, that's when it's at its maximum gain. So kind of a little different way of doing it. From there, back to this output, which is tied to that other side of that feedback loop, we've got this capacitor, once again, blocking the DC from the op amp circuit, and then a resistor. And off of that resistor, we got these guys here, which are 2 diodes and a capacitor, and that's your clipping circuit. These should be mentioned, these diodes in the Distortion Plus are germanium, and I actually bothered to get the 1N270s, the original diodes that are supposedly in the circuit. And what should be said about germanium is their forward voltage is lower than silicon, however you say it. The germanium clips at 0.3, silicon 0.7. So that makes a big difference. That's going to determine how much drive and compression, how much you're clipping off the signal. And the clipping is basically distortion. This capacitor in here is meant to cut off some of the high harmonics of this clipping stage. Way it's set up, it works in conjunction with this resistor here to work as a filter. And it's, you do the calculations of that, the 1 over 2 pi RC, and it's 15K or so. I'll get back to that too. That's kind of one of the mods that I talked about earlier. And then off of that, we just come over to this wire here, goes over to this pot. And this pot then is just, that's the volume knob. And then from there, it's, that volume knob comes over to here and then back out to the switch and out onto the amp or next pedal or what have you. The volume knob is just an attenuator. It's not, there's no amplification circuit. The only amplification going on is that one op amp circuit. So people have complained about the volume doesn't really do much. Yeah, it doesn't work well as like a clean boost or anything like that. You're pretty much, it works in conjunction really with the gain knob, because the gain knob provides volume, and then your volume is just attenuates after that. So basically this, in a distortion plus, the volume just attenuates whatever's going into it. So wherever you have that gain, you can subtract from that. You can't add to it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So with that, I guess maybe I'll play some sounds, and then we'll get back to some of the things you can do, modifications or whatnot. So let me grab the guitar. Going to start out with everything down, which is pretty much no sound whatsoever. I'll bring the volume up. That's gain all the way down, volume all the way up. Let's bring the volume back down and start going with the gain. One thing, before we do that, let me mention that one of the issues with this pedal that I found is that the gain pot is a 1 megohm resistor, and or potentiometer, and I find that to be entirely too high. There's a lot. You turn it a lot before it starts doing anything. So what I did was I turned it until I started to hear it, making a difference, actually increasing the gain, and then I measured the resistance, and that was about at 177K. So one of the mods you can do is replace this potentiometer with a 250K. Now I don't have one. I have this 100K, and I might put that in there to see. It doesn't really work because it's cutting off that 77K. But point being is, if you put a 250K in there, it's going to be easier to dial in, those in between rates. The whole sweep of the knob is going to be a lot better. The 1 meg is just way too much, and you'll see. I'll try to. And it's just not doing anything yet. Starting to hear it now. And then when it happens, it just starts happening all of a sudden. I'm probably close to max, it sounds like. And yes, that is maxed out. One thing you'll also notice about this is as that gain goes up, it gets much brighter. I'm going to turn it down. If you notice, I'm going to play this chord and I'm going to sweep it all the way up, and you'll hear how bright it gets. The reason is this circuit right here. What happens is that becomes a filter. When this is max gain, it becomes 0 ohms, and then this just becomes a filter. And by my calculations, once again 1 over 2 pi RC, it's about 720 hertz, and that's the cutoff. So it's cutting everything 720 and below off. So it's not adding high, it's not boosting high, it's getting rid of the lows. So that's kind of another mod that I was talking about. Well, since I'm done, I kind of went through all of them. There wasn't much to play. Let's do, that's the one mod I have. Let's do that right now. If you replace this capacitor here with a much higher value, in this case I'm going to use a 1 microfarad capacitor. So let's do just that, and then we'll sweep this gain and see if you notice the difference. Bear with me while I do this. Alright, gain a little bit down now. I'm going to sweep it up. So you hear that frequency stays flat and even with the 1 microfarad in there. The cutoff is really 10 hertz or so, 13 hertz. So it stays flat and even throughout the range of the gain. Got that mod out of the way. One other mod you can do is this capacitor I mentioned before. I don't have my pointer now. This capacitor here, smoothing out the highs, that's about 15K. Kind of went for, try to cut that frequency down a little bit more to try to get the the pedal as it is a little too, especially when it's really driving, a little bit too bright and buzzy for me. So I replace this with a, that's a 1 nano. I'm going to put a 4.7 nano in there, and let's give that a listen. So, again, to review the mods, and I'm not going to mess with the pot right now, but trust me when I say, replace the 1 megohm potentiometer with a 250K, and the sweep will be much better. Replace the capacitor in the feedback loop path back to ground. Replace that guy with a 1 microfarad, and then the capacitor in the clipping stage, replace that with a little higher. I used anything higher than a nano. We could do 1.2 nano. I used 4.7, but the higher you go up, the more it's going to take out some of those squealing kind of high harmonics in that clipping stage, especially with those germanium diodes. I should also say you could change out I'm not going to do it, but you could change out the op amp with anything that's single op amp. LM308 would go in there. It's got a little lower slew rate, so the Proco Rat has that chip, so it might get a little bit of a different sound there. You can change those diodes with silicon diodes, and it'd be a whole different sound because you're going to be clipping at 0.7 instead of 0.3. But any rate, that's my look at the MXR Distortion Plus, and a few of the mods. I think I covered everything. A few of the mods you can do to get a different sound out of it. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks.